Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine.
Good.
Ready and raring to stop a war. And they've been trying. I think Trump's been trying. At least he claims that he's been working hard to get the troops out of Afghanistan. Big question is that going to happen? Can he do it? Are the secret forces, the deep state, too powerful for Trump if he really wants to come home? Is it changed? But he's been trying ever since he's been in office. What is it now, going on to 3 years?
Yeah.
And but nothing much has really changed. There's been negotiations, there's talk, and maybe they'll come about, but it just seems like they still have a long way to go. But the real tragedy is there should be no question in anybody's mind, whether they're in government or whether they're American citizen, it needs to end. It's time to quit this nonsense. You've had your chance. You've had, 18 years,
yeah.
And it's still all over the place. Why don't we listen to history? Thousands of years of history. The people in Afghanistan don't want to be ruled by outsiders. And yet they keep going in, and we thought we really outfoxed the Soviets. We enticed them and played their game and got them to go in there and help commit suicide and break up the Soviet system. But what are we doing? Contributing to the breaking up and the bankruptcy of the United States by doing it. So we don't listen. So it's been foolish. It's a long time. That has nothing to do with national defense. And the tragedy, too, is also in the people killed. There were 2,372 American soldiers killed, over 20,000 wounded, and another group that barely gets mentioned is 1,720 contractors were killed in that. And but it's hard to find another number. We can find what's happened with the American casualties, but if you want to find out, well, how many Afghans died? They didn't. The Afghan people didn't invade anybody.
Yeah.
And even the accusations about Al Qaeda is not very convincing. But over 100,000 Afghans were killed. So it is a tragic war. It's time to admit it, and it's fortunately not nearly as deadly as Vietnam was, but it's still as stupid, of all the lost life. And I've always said, about Vietnam, we won more in peace than we did in war. We won nothing. We lost everything in war. When we had peace, now all of a sudden we do business with them. So I vote for peace. I vote for getting out of here. I vote for not trying to have a blame game. It won't do any good. But right now, there's a chance. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe Trump is sincere, but he has the argument going back and forth. The downside of leaving right now, will there be enough troops, and will this trouble just flare up again and we'll have to go back in? So those are the kind of things he's facing, but I don't think you can solve all those problems. You have to just look at the picture of, should we be there or shouldn't we be there? If we shouldn't be there and it hasn't made any sense to be there, I think it's just time to leave.
Yeah, and after 9/11, of course, we wanted to invade someplace. We had to invade. We had to hit someone. The Neocons wanted us to hit Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Remember, we even had that general who spoke on one of your lunches. He was in the elevator with them, and he said, "Well, we're ready to go into Afghanistan." They said, "No, we're going to Iraq." So they wanted to go in somewhere. So what do? Well, the Taliban, who had controlled Afghanistan for several years before 9/11, they had Al-Qaeda training on their territory, and so we blew up the country. But, by that logic, we could also blow up Florida and blow up Germany, because Al-Qaeda also trained there, but they had to attack something. They had to attack somewhere. And if you remember, the Neocons and the interventionists have been ginning up a war against the Taliban for several years before 9/11. Remember, they blew up those statues. Everything they did was increasing the pressure. So I think they saw that as a good, easy war against a backward country, get a good victory under our belt. Didn't really work out that way.
Well, we read this article on the national interest, Trump's Afghanistan exit or mirage, and it's really up for grabs because even the people who are saying, yes, we should leave, some of the realists say, yeah, but we got to keep some people there. We always have to have that. And then also this plan, well, if we leave, we need an agreement, and we need to be able to come back whenever it's necessary. What if Al Qaeda comes back and takes over the country? Yeah, Al Qaeda is going to go in and get rid of the Taliban.
Yeah.
And as mixed up from our viewpoint from the West, the system that they have there, the Taliban is not a threat to us. I mean, they're a threat because we are over there and mess around with their country. So I think that this idea, be prepared, we'll leave, but we got to go back. And that's why we need to keep the argument of not coming back out completely. Leave about 6,000 or 8,000 people there, which can't win a war, but it can just be enough to justify our existence and justify spending money and justify buying more bombs and weapons and all this nonsense.
Yeah, and the whole thing came about because, Trump did say he wants to get out of these wars, and of course Washington freaked out at that time, and but he tasked Pompeo probably kicking and screaming against not doing it, but he tasked him, he said, I want you to put together some talks, I want to approach the Taliban, I want to get a peace deal going. They've been talking since last year, last autumn, I think, and they're pretty close to a peace deal, and basically the U.S. is going to, as a first step, and this actually sounds like real diplomacy, the U.S. will knock down from 14,000 to 8,000 troops initially. The Taliban will agree to renounce Al Qaeda. They'll agree to a ceasefire and agree to direct talks with the Kabul U.S.-backed government. So that's a first step. They were announcing that they may actually have a deal this week, and it looks like it might be a little bit delayed. But we're awfully close to a deal that's going to put us really in line to start a real withdrawal from Afghanistan.
And the people who don't want us to move too quickly, they would like to see a strong coalition continue between the U.S. and the Taliban, this alliance, because ISIS, the really, really bad people, would come back in, and therefore we have to have this present. But it's hard for our government and our system of government and our deep state to give up on the notion of the empire, because the empire is under attack. The foreign policy is not all that successful. The monetary policy isn't doing so well. The whole problem of trade around the world is not doing so well. So they are, I'm sure, feel like they're under the gun that the empire is under threat. And they have to have the empire. And I think the empire is getting weaker, which we should see as a benefit. So then people will say, well, you guys want to just turn inward and be isolated. No, but we'll look inward for solving problems and improving ourselves. But we don't look inward and say we want to stay out of this. We'd like to see the relationships with countries be in free trade and diplomatic and moving in a different direction. But this hopefully is an opportunity. The one thing, though, that I think is probably going to help motivate the president to continue with, we hope his instincts are, and that is there's an election coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one article where they mentioned that Nixon's his greatest popularity is when he said that he was finishing up and bringing the troops home. That's when his popularity skyrocketed, and Trump would too, because people do know now there's talk about the deficit, and most people would say, well, if the war's ending, we're bringing the troops home, maybe we'll spend less money. So one thing for sure. I don't think it will diminish Trump's popularity. It's going to diminish his cordial relationship with the deep state, because there'll still be, so often that deep state and the pro-war is so much controlled by the media. That's really a great obstacle when they move in this direction.
Well, the tragedy of the Trump administration is that his biggest problem is his own team. Everyone he surrounds himself with does not want to get out of Afghanistan. They're not telling him what you just told him, which he should hear, which is you're going to be enormously popular and you're going to wrong foot the Democrats. He's going to put the Democrats in a corner where they're going to end up defending keeping troops in Afghanistan forever. He can outflank them, having gotten troops out. We're in the process of getting it out, and look much better. But the neocons are digging their heels in. They don't want to get out. The people around him not supporting him, and it's tragic. In fact, there's a piece we looked at earlier today in the Wall Street Journal about David Petraeus. Remember him? Disgraced former general, the guy who gave up secrets to his mistress and didn't get punished for it. He wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal. Under no circumstances should Trump administration repeat the mistake its predecessor made in Iraq and agree to a total withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan. You know, and if the whole thing is just slathered with BS. He's talking about how the Taliban will conspire with ISIS if we leave, and that's a bold lie, because the Taliban have been fighting battles with ISIS, you know, increasingly viciously, starting in this spring especially. They're mortal enemies. And you brought up earlier the suggestion that the U.S. might join with the Taliban to fight ISIS. The Taliban is not going to make peace with ISIS. They can't stand ISIS. They're fighting against them. But this is what Petraeus is saying, puts everything on not getting out, not pulling a single thing out. And you think, well, what's in it for him? Well, he's on the board of the Institute for the Study of War, which is totally funded by the war machine, and the Atlantic Council. These are funded by weapons manufacturers. This is why they have him on their board, to argue for forever war. So when people read something like Petraeus, they should really stop and think, who's paying this guy?
Yeah, right. The one thing is it's much better to come from a position of non-intervention. And I think our opposition is determined that we have to paint the non-interventionists as radicals, and they're out of mainstream. You can't talk to them, because they like the management thing, and they like intervention. Therefore, then they can vary it. They can be all degrees. You move troops here, it's his fault. Management is bad. We have to build coalitions. It sounds better. It's not radical, like come on home and not getting involved in these wars, or deciding to drop bombs on everybody, even though there's some in the administration that would just as soon do that.
Yeah.
But I think the argument has to be to discredit the managers of these kind of things, and that if not, they will always want to be the moderates. And we'll always look for improving our management and our understanding, and reach out, and then they'll be more tempted. Even the anti-war people would say, well, yeah, this is true. We need to move in this direction. Instead of spending $1 billion on these weapons, let's set up a food program, and let's do it all in welfare spending someplace. Mm-hmm. And that to me hasn't worked, doesn't work. And I would think that people, and I'm hoping that the younger generation that is looking at this right now, is bearing the burden of all this, will look toward this non-interventionist foreign policy. And I think they have the exposure we've had. We have good reception from young people with our institute here, because they know what's going on. It's not like they're a lost generation. They know they're having trouble getting their student loans paid off, and being able to buy a house and all these kind of things. Then they look. Right now, the announcement today is there's going to be $1 trillion debt this year and next year too. And when is that going to stop? Because that is not economic growth. That is economic distortion, and a penalty that has to be paid by somebody else. And the beneficiaries are somebody today, for instance, the military-industrial complex will be beneficiaries of that kind of spending, but somebody else will have to suffer the consequence.
And that's a great point with young people struggling. You know, we've seen the numbers. Not doing well, and then they see rich, corrupt politicos and former military guys always going through the revolving door. You saw that Mattis is rejoining the board of one of the big defense contractors, always going through the revolving door, saying we need to take that money and spend it on war. And I think they are starting to get resentful. I hope they are, and I hope they start feeling like they're being ripped off, which they are.
That's right, and I just hope my sense of optimism comes from having met a lot of young people, and I think they're open to this message. But unfortunately, they hear the other side, or the other people hear it. But I imagine, we know about the deep state and the media and the organized effort. But I think the other thing with young people is probably apathy. How do you get them interested? Mm-hmm. It's not that I think, I don't work with the notion that our goal is just overwhelming. We have to convince it's 51% and this is going to rule the day. And it isn't that. It's getting young people to understand the issue and become thought leaders, become writers, and people who are in journalism, people who end up advising congressmen and different things like that. They need to have their minds changed. So this is the reason, whether it's non-intervention, foreign policy, or whatever, I still think that it's the education is necessary. That happens to be one of the reasons why I strongly endorse all the work you do when you put these conferences together, because we do reach a lot of people. And, I think Lou might have mentioned it, Rockwell, when he was on our program. He says, boy, I'll tell you what, you guys do a good job. You get people from around the world to come, young people and people around the world, because it has universal value. And I think this is, I believe that is where the answer is. And because most people will become followers or they'll be apathetic. And if you look at the time I got involved back in the early 70s, I would say there's tremendous improvement in the interest and understanding of, say, Austrian economics.
Yeah.
And I think we're making the same progress on non-intervention.
Yeah.
I think we hear the word non-intervention used in a correct manner, and even the use of isolationism has changed too, because I never liked that term, even though some libertarians sort of liked it because you bring the troops home and isolate, but it sounds like you don't want to deal with people.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that some of this conversation has changed, I think is very positive.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned the young people, and this year for the first time, as our viewers probably know as well, we launched the Scholars Seminar that's going to take place the day before our conference on August 24th. When we announced this, we don't have the huge media backing it, but we had a great response. We got a great group of young people, college students, who are going to sit through an all-day seminar. They volunteered to sit through an all-day seminar, but great speakers. And so it is very encouraging. And then they'll go to the conference the next day. So they're going to have 2 days of really pretty intense training. And we do have great speakers coming to the conference for all of you. We've worked hard putting it together this year. Most of the year we spend on it. But one thing is missing, and that's you. We have to have the room full. We have to have the people there. We have to have an enthused group. We talked to David Stockman yesterday, and he talked about how important it is to get together, to start a movement, to show the flag, to show that there is a group of us out there. So we need you to be there too. This is about our last week and a half before the conference. You can go to ronpaulinstitute.org/conference, and the link is in the description to this show. Get your tickets, join us, show the flag, and be part of what this is all about, which is the rise, as Dr. Paul says, the rise of non-interventionism and grabbing our place at the table.
Very good, and I too look forward to meeting a lot of individuals, and we will meet the young people and the people that come from around the world. But I've always found that like-minded people get along very well, and during some hard campaigning over the years where we would get a lot of people out, I always try to explain that there's problems out there, and I talk about them, but I don't know exactly when they're going to end or what will happen. I do know how important the ideas are and to move in that direction. But I also believe that when you get together and you talk and you work on this, you can't dwell on the negative, even though there's lots of negatives out there. This economy is a mess and debt is a mess. The foreign policy is very dangerous. But you have to, when you go to a conference, you meet a lot of people. And I think people enjoy being with like-minded people. And really and truly, people should have fun doing this because it is uplifting. And besides, we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. But I do believe that we all can get satisfaction if we seek out the truth and we're comfortable with our beliefs, that we can have a good time and work hard at it and feel rewarded. But I want to thank you all for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.